over to you, the Worldwide War on Babies. And what they pointed out is in a couple of countries, India is another one, but as well as China, there is a very skewed sex ratio with their kind of one-child policy. So in some parts of China, the ratio of boys to girls is 140 to 100, and typically it's 105 to 100, with more boys being born, sort of nature's way of compensating for boys dying out more often in post-birth. But in some of these countries, they, because of selective abortions, you have a much higher rate of boys. So if you follow these cultures across time with these very skewed sex ratios, you see some results that they didn't predict would happen, but are kind of explainable. So for one thing, when you have large numbers of males in the adolescent population, you have much higher rates of delinquency and other kinds of crime, because delinquency is overwhelmingly committed by boys, regardless of what culture. So, what's that?
What is delinquency?
Crimes.
Doing bad things, getting into trouble.
Stealing, aggression, that kind of thing. You don't see that kind of stuff committed by girls at all very often, but boys, yeah. So you saw rising crime rates in China and Pakistan, India, these other countries with really skewed birth rates. Go forward 10 more years, you've got a lot of males and very few females. What do they do for brides? So you have a lot of unmarried males in these populations, and one thing that has happened is that males try getting brides from other countries and bringing them back, which has created a lot of cultural clashes, in countries where it's not acceptable to marry outside of, say, your clan group or your ethnic background. That is not looked on at all favorably. So you get a lot more tension, upset, that kind of thing around kind of intermarriages. And there was one other thing, let me look at my note here, that I remember talking about. Oh, yeah. The deaths of second and third born baby girls are like 5 times higher. So even after they're born, neglect of girls after birth is much more common in countries with a one-child policy, where usually the boys are favored over the girls. So those are some of the negatives that I found out about in reading that article and some others about the one-child policy. So I folded this into my class when I talk about sex selection and reproductive technologies and that kind of thing. Now, in my own background, reading before you came in today, I just got curious what are the costs and benefits. But one thing that's been found is in cultures like China, with one child, when couples have a girl, they invest in her much more than they would have if they had had a boy and a girl. And what it's done is it's made the sexes, boys and girls, more equal in that culture. So these days in China, there are about equal numbers of boys and girls enrolled in college, going into business, that kind of thing. So I've got a couple of references I can give you. Boys and girls, it's a much more equal society as a result of the one-child policy, which is, I don't know how you weigh those. Selective abortions and killing off girls, that's really bad, but in one kind of way it's made for a more equal society. What else? Under one-child policies, one study I read said that women are less likely to seek prenatal obstetrical care because they're afraid that they will have to abort the child. So that's created a health problem in the sense that really important health care during pregnancy is not being sought out as much as it might under a two-child policy. What else? I'm brain dumping here, but
yeah, that's great.
So this article was a editorial just a few months ago in the American Medical Association, Journal of the American Medical Association. They have a whole paragraph here on the benefits of the one-child policy and then the negatives there. So it's, if you're looking to write a paper on it, that's a pretty good list, especially those 2 paragraphs right there. I found that important.
So what solutions are there for this imbalance with males and females?
Time, you know, with the reversal of the policy, you know, with later generations, it will probably go away. I think one of whoever wrote the questions, you or both, you know, I think one of them was related to wealth. Statistics affirm that women become wealthier, more educated, birth rates fall, and that's been really widely shown in a lot of like the public health kinds of data. So I would imagine with the relaxation of the policy, you'll probably find, especially with China's rising income, you'll probably still find lower birth weights than you did in 1967 when birth rates than when the policy was implemented. So my guess is, you'll still have smaller families, but you'll probably have a more equal distribution of boys and girls. So I'm thinking probably if you wait 20 years, no, it's going to be more than that. Sometime it'll go away. I found a number of articles that suggest, you know, it's going to be a long-term problem because one of the biggest worries they have as a result of the policy is filial obligation, which means the obligation that siblings feel toward their elders. Highly valued in China, you know, the expectation of older parents is that their children will take care of them when they're older. Now, if you've only got one child, that child has gained more education, which you would in a smaller family, and they move into an urban area, you know, to pursue a job. They're not available to care for their aging parents. So who's going to take care of them? So that's one really big concern, and I don't think that's going to go away for decades, probably.
Okay.
So that article I just gave you talked about, they called it the 4-2-1 problem, where a set of two parents is responsible for one child, but 4 of their own parents. So, you know, and that one child is not in turn really going to feel as obligated to take care of their own parents when they get older. So I don't know how it's going to go away, but I think the reversal of the policy will probably have more benefits than problems, is my guess. But that's just a huge guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Some of the articles that Yvonne and I read mentioned some of the problems being that, as you mentioned earlier, delinquency in adolescence and then a higher crime rate as having to do with the imbalance. And we found an increase in sex trafficking and more willingness to turn to homosexuality.
Interesting. I would not have predicted the latter part of it. The sex trafficking probably makes sense if you can't find a partner or a mate, but
And then which would be more likely to lead to an increase in HIV.
right, especially if there's more shame attached to it in a certain culture, you know, where it's not only non-normative but ostracized, that kind of thing. But no, I hadn't read anything about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think both Yvonne and I have found it to be very interesting, and you brought up things that we had not found, so I think that would be good.
Go ahead.
Is there any one question that you were really thinking about?
I don't know what that is. I put a question mark above it.
The Gaokao?
Yeah.
So go ahead and tell Dr. MacPhee.
Gaokao is a test. Every high school student wants to go to college need to take that.
So it's like a placement test you have to pass in order to either go on a vocational route or a college route. Kind of, I don't know if you saw the Harry Potter films or read the books, but it's kind of like a sorting hat. Sounds like, okay.
The intensity is
Yeah,
not like what we have in America.
very much, yeah. I've
Yeah.
read about that
2
too.
days long, correct?
Yes,
Some students will put an IV, they'll hook up an IV.
it's fine.
So they have fluids, they have,
That goes into their veins.
so that they have enough fluid and they have energy to take the Gaokao. That's what I've read. Yeah.
Eat potatoes, that's what I tell the students before final exams. That's been proven to be effective too. Um, yeah, the other ones, I don't even know if I could speculate, like the sociological, cultural effects of men with families and men without families. But from what I've read, family life is very important in almost all Asian cultures. So, and they tend to be shame-based cultures as compared to the U.S. and European countries where it's a guilt-based culture. So if you do something bad, it reflects poorly on your family. If I do something bad, it reflects poorly on me, and I need to make amends for it, that kind of thing. So it might be that for men without families, it's kind of an embarrassment or shameful, but I'm only speculating there. I don't know.
So, how, being an expert with parenting,
Mhm.
what changes in parenting? So you talked a little bit about
Yeah.
girls being invested in equally. Any other changes in
Well,
parenting with the one-child policy?
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about is it really is a stereotype that singletons are spoiled in comparison to children who grow up as siblings. Um, they may feel more privileged. I mean, there are all of these assumptions about differences based on family size, most of which are either not supported or they're very weak kinds of relations. I know from teaching about this in several different classes that the students come in having ideas about birth order, that sort of thing, but the research is really, really mixed on it, and if findings are found, they're pretty weak. So I would say, and I know there are a couple articles I did find that have compared one child, boy only, girl only families to those with two, and found no differences really. So it indicates to me that the child rearing dynamics probably aren't altered that much, with
Okay.
one important exception. I did find an article on what happens if your one child dies. And they found much more intense grieving and shame if their one child died, kind of ostracism going on, that sort of thing. But in terms of the rearing, the research here in Europe and China would indicate there's probably not much difference, except for maybe an investment if you know you only can have one child. But in terms of how the child is treated and the outcomes, it doesn't seem to differ a whole lot.
And dynamics in education? Do you think there's comparing?
Well, you're back to the test that you talked about. I think there's so much pressure to succeed. I know that's true from reading about South Korea. I assume it's true in China. And Japan as well. I know it's true that the pressure is there regardless of whether it's a one-child policy in China or you're talking about not that policy in Japan or South Korea. It seems to be that the pressure to excel is there as part of an Asian culture, not just a one-child policy.
Okay.
There's a really good book recently that compared the U.S. to Finland, South Korea, and Poland in education. It was pretty insightful talking about their educational systems, but the pressure on South Korean kids to succeed comes culture-wide, but especially from parents. I assume it's going to be true for China.
Okay.
Yeah, we have another student, Peter, and he's from Korea, and he's doing his thesis on the pressure that's on Korean students to
Okay.
succeed, because only one person can really succeed.
In the
And,
family?
Yeah, or
Okay.
in like an entire class.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he said that a lot of people his age, so he's a senior and a little older, are not even going to have children because they have to spend so much for more education for them that
Oh,
they just can't afford it.
yeah. I wish I could remember the title of that book, but I think if you put in those those three countries and education, you could probably pull it up pretty quickly.
So have you heard of that, or are you familiar with that little emperor syndrome? That when you only have one son or even one child,
Yeah.
then they are treated
Like a tyrant or
Right.
almost, yeah. I've heard of that, but again, the evidence doesn't support
doesn't
it.
support that.
No. Let me see if I can find it in here, but I think it's in one of these first four, so that I found related to that in terms of, yeah, general impacts on family life here. So there's one here that was published in 2014 on the changing family, and another one on gender equality in education. I think it's this one on the changing family that talks about singleton, and doesn't find that there are at least those kinds of changes to the little emperor.
Thank you.
So as far as China's future and overpopulation,
Yeah.
I mean, does that still seem like an issue? And
I wish I were a demographer and could answer that question. I'm going more on impression and not accurate data here, but from what I've read in demography, if you've got a big population bulge, even if they reproduce at a slower rate than before, you still got so many people in the population that you're going to get a huge population growth. So I would guess that the birth rate may slow down, but the size of the population is still going to expand astronomically, just because you have so many people having babies. Which is kind of odd. In some European countries, they're really trying to offer incentives for increase in the number of births, because they're worried it might be racist in some cases, thinking that the old mainline whites are not going to be reproducing as quickly as possible. I've read that. Or they just won't have enough workers to support those who are of the baby boom generation, like here. Yeah. But yeah, I think they're going to still be dealing with the population problem, even if the birth rate is lowered, from what I've read. You've certainly hit the limits of my expertise, but that's fine.
thanks for
One reason I love this field is, there's always something else to learn, really.
anything else that I think it covered. Wow.
May I ask a question? You have a thesis process here in high school? That's pretty cool.
We do. We have
Yeah.
a thesis process, and we have the senior